Black Ops Cold War beta for PC is finally here, and I've figured out the best settings to increase FPS and visibility and beat the competition. Hey guys, it's FourEyes or Dave here. I'm finally back again with another video, and you guys probably guessed it, it's a settings video. I've been doing a lot of these recently. They've been doing really well for my channel, and they've been receiving really good feedback as well. Now, the Black Ops Cold War beta is finally here for PC. I'm really excited. I've been playing it a decent amount, and it feels really good on PC, really well optimized, but there's definitely some settings that you can change to really get an advantage while getting the FPS high and keeping that visibility also high. So we're not just dropping everything very low. I mean, obviously we will be dropping a lot of settings very low, but we'll be keeping some things on that will keep that visibility and keep you competitive in these games. So let's jump into these settings then. I'm going to start off before we go into the graphics actually by just mentioning the mouse sensitivity in this game. It should be exactly the same as whatever you had in either Warzone or Modern Warfare, whichever. You might have only had Warzone, not had the multiplayer, but that transfers over 1-to-1 into here, so get that sensitivity in here straight away and make sure your multipliers are set at 1 so that we keep that muscle memory intact as we play. And then make sure we've got things like mouse acceleration and mouse filtering definitely off, and mouse smoothing, none of that. Okay, now we can go into the graphics, the key part of this video. So display mode, this should always be full screen. The options we have are windowed full screen, and multi-monitor. Full screen will give you the highest FPS because it basically means that Windows is exclusively rendering in the game and not trying to render in kind of anything that's going on in the background, which you would get from having it windowed. So keep this at full screen for best performance. Monitor, you obviously set this to whatever monitor you have. I have 2 monitors, so I've got to make sure this is on my correct monitor. Refresh rate, make sure this is set at the refresh rate of your monitor, so 144 Hz for me. Gameplay VSync and menu VSync, both of these should be off. If you're someone who does like to use G-Sync, then do not use in-game VSync. I say this with all my settings tutorials. There'll be some people out there who'll say put VSync on and then activate G-Sync, and that's how it works. That's not how it works. Instead, you have to cap the FPS and then activate your G-Sync afterwards. There's videos on that if you want to know about it. I'm not going to go into it in this video. Render resolution, I've got this set, this should always be 100 basically, unless you're having some serious issues. My resolution is, display resolution is 2560 by 1440 or 1440p. For a lot of people, this will probably be 1080p. And if you are having serious issues after all of these settings are set, then I would recommend trying to drop the render resolution just down a bit. Basically, if you were to set this to 50, then it would render at 50% of the resolution. So it would render for me at, it doesn't actually update for me, but it would be 50% of this, so half of the resolution, which is not what I want, but it can be a last resort if nothing else works. Aspect ratio, I would keep this at automatic, which should be 16:9 for most of you, unless you're running ultra wide, in which case it would be 21:9. But you shouldn't be changing this anyway, just leave it automatic. Colorblind type, this is kind of a personal preference thing, or potentially something which you need. I'm actually colorblind myself, red-green colorblind specifically, and so I need to have this on deuteranopia, which is red-green colorblindness. But there will be a lot of people out there who will actually, because it says here, or choose the color for each group of icons that suits you. So it's actually useful for people who just don't like the standard colors in the game. You can just change the color of what teammates and enemies look like. So scan through these and find what one suits you the best. Field of view, this is a kind of personal preference. I would recommend always having this above 100. FOV is such a massive advantage in Call of Duty and any other FPS. They've added it to consoles now, which is awesome as well. I haven't been playing at 105. I might try turn this up actually for a bit and see what happens if I put it to 120. The issue is that having higher values, as you see here, will actually result in lower frame rate sometimes, because you're technically rendering more on your screen because you can see further like wide apart. Also, enemies will be a lot smaller and kind of more distant, it will seem, if you have this too high. So 105, I think, is a good medium and a good starting point, which I think will be a really good place for most of you guys to start off at. ADS field of view, this was a contested point in Modern Warfare and Warzone as well, and a lot of people have moved to the affected one, which basically, so independent says aiming down sights will zoom the field of view to its intended value, and affected will zoom to a value closer to your field of view setting. This is actually really good. It doesn't zoom in as much, and the visual recoil that you'll get when shooting in game is a lot less, and you can actually control your recoil a lot more. When it comes to Warzone, this is also really, really important when you're doing some of those longer range engagements. So I'd recommend trying both of these out, seeing what one works for you, but affected is best for me. Brightness, this is just simple. Just set this to so that it follows these things. You'll actually see that this one, depending on what your monitor is like at the moment, you might see that this one I actually have a little bit visible. I always have my brightnesses a little bit higher than it suggests. I just feel like that works best for me. Frame rate limit, I have this on custom, and this should actually be maxed, so I have my frame rate limit maxed out. You can set an in-game frame rate limit here, so potentially I could put this to 144 if I wanted it to be, if I was doing G-Sync, then I could have that on, which is good, because I wouldn't want it to go above 144, or I'd actually put it a bit lower, probably 140 for G-Sync. But for most of you guys who just want to max your FPS, just shove this all the way to the right. Menu custom frame rate limit, you may as well keep this at 60 or so. This keeps the frame rate in the menus kind of smooth enough to like get through. It doesn't feel choppy or anything, but there's no point in your menus having crazy high frame limits because it's just going to eat up time. Is it going to eat up your CPU just sitting on the menu, which we don't want. There's no point. Okay, now we get into the details and texture settings. So texture quality, this is really dependent on your VRAM. You'll see it says effect on VRAM is very high. So dependent on how much VRAM your GPU has, mine has 8,011 megabytes. It's basically 8 gig of memory of VRAM. Then I can have this a bit higher. I kind of go between medium and high because texture quality doesn't actually have a huge effect on your FPS, assuming you have the right amount of VRAM. So if you have very low VRAM or you just want pure max FPS, you can drop this to lowest, but the game looks awful with it on lowest. Potentially when you're playing Warzone, you drop this to lowest, but for multiplayer, shove it on medium and make the game look a bit better and potentially be able to spot people easier from background objects. Texture filtering, I put this on low along with model quality and the screen space reflections and the object view distance. These are all on low because they're kind of additions to the game that I don't think are that important. And they just eat up FPS. They say effect on VRAM. Effect on VRAM is not the same as effect on FPS. So even though it says low effect on FPS, it will actually have a higher effect on the frame rate than you actually think. So have these on low, and then special effects, I just put them on medium. It's the quality of the resolution used for special effects like fire. You don't need any of these higher than low, really, unless you're trying to make the game look really nice, which we're not looking for. We're looking for best performance and best visibility. Today's video is sponsored by ProSight, a PC application that gives players access to Counter-Strike-style custom crosshairs in any PC game they want. The application comes with an easy-to-use interface, allowing players to customize their crosshair to any size, color, and style, save it as a preset, and then take it into games like Warzone, Fortnite, and Sea of Thieves. For more info on the app, head to centerpointgaming.com, link in the description. So next is shadow and lighting, a really, really important part. Shadows are the bane of FPS. So I have the volumetric lighting turned to low and the shadow qualities turned to low as well. These will eat up your FPS if you turn them up. And I think having them on low, it makes the shadows look a bit horrible, especially in the menus. You can see they look horrible. If I go back and apply these, you'll see the shadows on my character here look a bit crazy. But in-game, you don't notice it that much, and it will give you lots of FPS. Dynamic shadows, I've actually kept these on all for now. This could be a point which I change later, but as you can see here, dynamic shadows a dynamic object is something like a person running around, an enemy. And if an enemy's around a corner and they have a shadow on, I'd like to be able to see that shadow. So you can turn it to either disabled, self only, or all. I have it on all. Ideally, I would have it so that I didn't show myself, not because that covers it to any enemies or anything. It would just mean that I don't have to render that in. But I definitely want to see enemy shadows, so I shove this on all for that visibility bonus. Special effect shadows, definitely keep that on disabled, and weapon shadow, you don't need that on either, so disable that too. Anti-Aliasing Quality. So this has changed a little bit since Modern Warfare. They've changed it from basically the exact names of the anti-aliasing to just disabled, lowest, low, medium, high, and ultra. It actually shows what each of these mean over here, so the one that I used in Modern Warfare was SMAA1X, so I would recommend that you put it on that, because FXAA and off just gives loads and loads of jaggies and looks kind of horrible, and there's a lot of foliage and stuff in this game that with jaggies looks absolutely disgusting, so do with it as you will. You might be fine with anti-aliasing off, but I'm really not. I don't like it. And FXAA is just a blurry mess, in my opinion. So SMAA1X, solid anti-aliasing, and if you have, it will use a bit of FPS here, but I think it makes the game a hell of a lot better to look at and will allow you to distinguish enemies from the background a lot easier too. Motion blur, get that off. No one wants that. It makes it look all cinematic, but you can't see a thing when you're turning. Subsurface scattering and order independent transparency, just disable these. These are kind of fluff. I guess that's what I described them. They're just additions to the game, which you don't really need to focus on. So let's just disable those. Display gamma, just leave it on computer unless you're playing on a TV, in which case you turn it to this, but most of us are on PCs, so keep it as sRGB. Display adapter, ensure here that you've got, it should auto-select your GPU, so I've got my RTX 2070 selected, but if for some reason it's defaulted to something else as the auto-select, make sure you've got your actual dedicated graphics card selected here. CPU priority management, this is a really interesting one I saw. It says here that it can either be set to automatic or manual, and automatic will allow the priority for Black Ops Cold War to be changed by the game. This will, among other things, reduce the frame rate limit of the game when it's not the current focused window. That's actually a nice thing that it does, where basically if you don't focus, if you alt-tab out the game, then it drops the FPS down so it doesn't eat up system usage when you've not got the game focused. I do kind of like that as a feature, but the fact that it says that it can change it, because it says this will, among other things, do this, I don't want the game changing its priority randomly. So I've got it set to manual so that if I want to change the CPU priority in Task Manager, I do it myself. That's way better in my opinion. So turn it to manual and just leave it as that. I think it's a bit dodgy to leave it to do its own thing. The last thing I will change is in audio, and that is the bass boost option for audio presets. I think this is really, really important. So this is the equivalent of the low boost in Modern Warfare. The Treyarch mix is just a bit too tinny for me, and I prefer the bass boost. Some people actually do like high boost and think they get better sound on like certain sounds from that, but I think footsteps sound way better with bass boost. The grenades and some of the gun sounds will be very bassy, but you'll be able to hear a lot more, so definitely have bass boost on. And then finally, in interface, if we have a look around, you can do things like you can turn off player names if they're getting in your way. I don't find that an issue. I actually quite like seeing the names of people that I kill. You can turn off ally health bars if you think there's just a lot of the visual clutter that you might not like. Damage-based hit markers, which could be nice. For some reason, you could turn off your crosshair. Don't know why you'd want to do that. But there's a bunch of different little HUD elements that you can play around with here and get it exactly how you want it. I'm fine with it as standard, but you might think differently and you might like this. You can also turn on subtitles, which might, if you're someone who's not as good at hearing things and you find yourself missing out on knowing that there's kill streaks coming in and stuff, then you can turn these on and then the game will basically say like artillery inbound and you won't miss it because it will be in front of your eyes. So anyway, there we go. That is all the settings I wanted to cover today. Quite a lot of settings, very, very similar to Modern Warfare, but some settings that have been changed a little bit since then. If you have enjoyed this video and you find it informative, then please do give it a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm going to be bringing out a bunch of videos on Black Ops Cold War when it releases, and hopefully over this beta weekend I'll get another video or two out on some of the game modes and some of the stuff I come across playing with my friends and stuff. I think this is going to be a really, really good year for Call of Duty. I actually prefer this style of game to what Modern Warfare was, and I think it's going to be awesome. So I will see you guys in my next video. Bye-bye.